Welcome to the Daily Faceoff Show, your everyday source for the latest news with top-notch insight and analysis. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Mike, they said we could exhale after round one of the Stanley Cup playoffs. 5 games in 2 days, and yet there is a lot of news to get to. Welcome into the Daily Faceoff Show. Today is Monday, May 16th. It is day 15 of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and it is a dark night in the NHL. But Mike, there's so much to recap. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing, man. And you know what? It's been really nice to just have 2 games to focus on like we did last night, and they were pretty offset. So got to watch a full night of hockey, and Frank, it was plenty exciting, eh, buddy?
Yeah, what a night it was. Jake Oettinger absolutely stealing the show in a losing effort. But first, let's get to the news of the day, breaking here in the last few minutes. Sources say that the Vegas Golden Knights have fired head coach Pete DeBoer. And in addition to that, we had some other head coaching news as the New York Islanders announced that Lane Lambert has been promoted from assistant coach to head coach. A statement coming from Lou Lamoriello on this Monday morning. Mike, not really any surprise on the Pete DeBoer front. We had been talking for weeks as the season closed that there would be likely changes coming. We found out shortly after the season ended that Kelly McCrimmon, their general manager, would be back. Pete DeBoer is now a free agent, and Lane Lambert now occupies the post on Long Island. And really a news dump, not surprising also in that the NHL politely requests teams to hold off on making any major announcements until after or between rounds, if at all possible.
Yeah, that's interesting that they waited for that. But, Lane Lambert, first off, getting the job in New York. Frank, a lot of people think he's been due for an NHL head coaching job for some time. I'd heard that that could be a possibility there even as early as a couple weeks ago, so no surprise. And we knew there'd be a fall guy in Vegas, and now we have it. Pete DeBoer's out, and open season begins. And boy, Frank, you wonder how much money they could throw at Barry Trotz in Vegas, but that's just a curiosity.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a number of really interesting candidates on the Vegas Golden Knights front. Barry Trotz would make a lot of sense to bring some structure to that team. What about someone that's on the TNT panel? Rick Tocchet would make some sense to me. I'd imagine there's a number of qualified candidates that are out there. Paul Maurice is a free agent as well, recently of the Winnipeg Jets. But let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock, and let's start with the Calgary Flames thrilling Game 7 overtime win on Sunday night. Mike, Sunday was just the second night in the 104-year history of the Stanley Cup playoffs that we saw 2 Game 7s go to overtime. And in this case, for a player that had been knocked for so long about his playoff performance and previous woes, that Johnny Gaudreau ends up netting the overtime winner for the Flames to send them on and set up a Battle of Alberta. And for Gaudreau, this really seemed to be his signature moment.
For sure. I mean, he got asked in the post-game presser about how big that goal was. And man, he was indignant about it. Like, yeah, man, this was a huge stage, like the biggest stage. Look what we just did. Well, I mean, Gaudreau to me was good the whole series, and 8 points in 7 games, but he hadn't had that big goal yet. And for him to rise the occasion and put a exclamation point on the series, to be the guy when he's been under the microscope for so long for his playoff performance, it's a huge deal for him and for everybody with Calgary. I mean, you had several players really rise to the occasion. Toffoli hadn't scored. Tkachuk hadn't scored. They'd heard those whispers in the series against Dallas. When was it going to happen? Well, it finally did in Game 7. Calgary got the offense they needed, but it definitely came from Johnny Hockey and him wearing an A on his jersey too. Take that into account, meant something to him. So pretty unbelievable hockey we get to watch.
Yeah, pretty cool scene too. You saw his mom mention how on Twitter just actually a little while ago that she had shed a tear when she saw that Johnny Gaudreau would have the A on his jersey. But in addition to that, a pretty cool scene after the game, coming off the ice, Johnny Gaudreau hugged Sean Monahan. Obviously, those two guys really close. Monahan not able to contribute after undergoing season-ending surgery. And the Flames, Mike, now move on to a much stiffer test, I would think, in the Battle of Alberta, although they had to wade through the muck against the Dallas Stars. We'll talk in a second about Jake Oettinger and his ridiculous performance, but Do you feel like this now next matchup will free up the Flames to be more like who they were in the regular season? Or do you have any concern coming off of this round one win that they maybe, weren't firing on all cylinders for a chunk of it?
I think a lot of it really just had to do with the way Dallas played. They're the ultimate counterpunch team. It wasn't a fluke that they went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals a couple of years ago. It's because when they turned it on come playoff time, and it's all behind Jamie Benn, their captain, who scored first, they can be stifling. And I think that was most of it. We've seen, Frank, that Calgary can play just about any style you need. And I'm sure against Edmonton, it's probably going to be a little bit more up-tempo, but Calgary will definitely want to be able to stick to their defensive guns and be able to lock down when necessary against such a potent offensive team like Edmonton.
Yeah, and we had been saying for a while that we thought that Calgary, their game might translate really well to the playoffs with their focus on defense and just how few goals they tend to give up. But Mike, they almost didn't make it there because of Jake Oettinger.
Mm-hmm.
If they lost last night, and to me, it kind of felt like the longer that went on, the more the Stars had a chance to win because they almost got goalied. Jake Oettinger turns in
Yeah.
one of the best all-time series performances, certainly in my lifetime. I was thinking back, and I was actually texting our managing editor, Matt Larkin, as the game was going on. I said, where does this stack up for you in terms of historic all-time goaltending performances? We were shooting some ideas back and forth. He said, maybe Eddie Belfour in 2004 against the Sens, 3 shutouts in one series. That's kind of rare. You think back to John Sebastian Jaguar and the run that he had with the Anaheim Ducks. That was incredible, winning the Conn Smythe in a losing effort. I mean, you look at Jake Oettinger and the series, 954 save percentage. It's right up there with that Eddie Belfour save percentage. It's actually, I think, just a slight notch above in decimal point. And had it not gone to overtime, he was closing in on Ken Dryden's all-time single series record for saves in one series without an OT game. Obviously, we ended up going to OT, but to look at Ottinger's performance, he not only put himself on the map, but he really established himself as a big game goalie.
All those stats that you just rattled off are really awesome. Like, those define what he did on the ice. But here's a couple things that I take away. When they went through the handshake line, did you see the respect that he got from the Calgary Flames? That, to me, really
Crazy.
showed what Ottinger did. They all spent about 2 minutes, it felt like, a piece telling him how awesome he was, because he was. This was one of the best series I've seen. And I talked to a couple goalie coaches around the NHL in the past, 12 hours here. And like, here's a couple comments here. All right. Best whole series I've ever seen. Okay, ever. That's an NHL goalie coach. I got another one that said, holy F, that kid might be the best series I've ever seen a goalie play. This is within the goalie community. So that's the historic level of it. And Frank, at the other end, Jacob Markstrom is at the top of his game as well. So like this was a goalie's dream, but Oettinger was going head to head with somebody who is a Vezina finalist this year, we'd imagine, and Markstrom. So it was awesome to see. And I think it really just planted the flag for Oettinger as the guy in Dallas and somebody that we can look to in the future to be potentially in the Vezina running. And if not that, at least a big game goaltender.
Yeah, there's really no doubt about that. And I love the confidence that he had after the game saying, I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to make sure that next time this rolls around that we're the team that ends up advancing. He was just absolutely under siege in that game 7 with the way that the Flames had really took it to the Stars in terms of more than 100 shot attempts. Like, it was a wild game, multiple posts hit in that third period and beyond, tons of opportunities, and chances for the Flames to score. Just as you mentioned, a goalie's dream. So Oettinger certainly up there in terms of the MVP of round one conversation, if not taking it home in a losing effort. We'll talk a little bit more about the goaltending matchups in round two coming up in the blue paint. But let's talk about the New York Rangers bouncing the Pittsburgh Penguins in round one, game 7. Also needing overtime. And the New York Rangers did something, Mike, that has never been done in the history of the game. Yes, I said already, 104 years the Stanley Cup playoffs have been around, and the Rangers are the first team ever to win a series erasing a 3-1 deficit while winning all three of those games in come from behind fashion. They were down 2-0 in game 5, 2-0 in game 6, and trailed 2-1 and 3-2 in game 7. They pull it out, and now it feels sort of like the end of an era in Pittsburgh. Don't know what the Penguins are going to end up doing with their offseason with Evgeny Malkin, Brian Rust, as well as Chris Letang as pending unrestricted free agents, in addition to Evan Rodriguez, who had a great series and a fantastic regular season. But for the Rangers' perspective, they now go on to meet the Carolina Hurricanes in round 2. Mike, when you look at this series, it really was odd from start to finish. Igor Shesterkin ends up leaving with pretty decent numbers in this series. But if you look at and take the triple overtime game out of the mix, he had an .893 save percentage in the series. And I don't think anyone expected Louis Domingue to be in net as long as he was for the Penguins. Tristan Jarry comes in. Don't know if you can fault that decision to start him in game 7, even though he ended up giving up 4. And the Rangers somehow, some way, end up winning this series that they probably had no business winning.
I mean, Pittsburgh had this in the bag. It felt like, man, they're up 3-1 in the series, and I don't care who's in goal for you at that point. You ought to be able to close things out, and they couldn't do it. And they had leads in all those games, man. Like, this is historic levels. And toss it on goalies all you want, but like, Louis Domingue's a third stringer, and he's played 100 and something NHL games. It's not like they were throwing somebody in the fire that had never played before. Pittsburgh just didn't get it done. And what bothered me, Frank, just the complaining about the helmet coming off of Pettersson and how that apparently submarined Pittsburgh's entire season. Like, really, dude? Like, I just think that's crazy, man. Like, a helmet comes off. First off, that's not a dumb rule, okay? Like, Robert Bortuzzo took a puck to the head for the Blues a couple weeks ago and had to miss a couple games. If he didn't have his helmet on, who knows what happens? Like, it's not a dumb rule. Pittsburgh had 5
they also
guys
didn't
on
know
the
the
ice.
rule, Mike.
Yeah, like, Pettersson didn't even look for his helmet, Frank. You know what he looked for? He looked for the ref. He's doing Christ the Redeemer on the ice like this, looking for a call. When they're winning 3-2 in game 7, he's looking for a call, doesn't look for his bucket and skates off the ice, and then they sit up there and complain about it. Oh, I'm fired up, man, because that's just silly, dude. They had 5 guys on the ice, like when the goal went in. It's not like the guy that went off Pettersson directly abandoned the front of the net and it went in. Like, fight through adversity and win a game. For a team, I mean, last word here, Frank, did it not make the Penguins seem entitled?
I don't know if entitled is the right word. It just felt like they were looking for something to blame. They didn't really have anything else to say. And in this case, yes, Pettersson, it was a cheap play from Alexis Lafreniere to wrestle off his helmet, I think. But he also could have put it back on. He didn't need to do the chin strap up. So you can just throw it back on your head and keep playing. But more to the point, once that happened, no one said that as he's skating to the bench, John Marino needs to serve up an absolute pizza after the fact. So that's really why the goal, extra cheese, whatever toppings you want, some pepperoni, like, it was ugly and it was right in the back of their net. So that's really what the issue was. And I don't know that there are any excuses for the Penguins having a 3-1 series lead. Yes, Sidney Crosby went down in game 5, and it was one of the oddest changes I've ever seen, swings in a game where you have the game flip that suddenly on its head with one player leaving the ice. But, Crosby sits out game 6, comes back for game 7. So they've got Crosby, Jarry in net. They get Ricard Raquel back as well. Obviously, not all of these guys necessarily are at 100%, but they would have had enough firepower, I would think, enough muscle to just win one game and try and survive to face the Canes in round 2.
Yeah, man. There's no excuses. It's when you're frustrated in those moments, you're trying to find anything, but bottom line, man, they didn't get it done. And they had every bit of a chance to beat the Rangers. They didn't. Now they got a lot of work in the offseason.
Yeah, no question about that. And we mentioned the potential end of an era. It's also, last I checked, it is the fourth straight first round series exit for the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have had very little to show in terms of playoff success since they won back-to-back Stanley Cups. Mike, so let's talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs. You want to talk about lack of first round success? The Leafs are now 0-10 in chances to close out a series going back to 2013. So they've lost 10 straight. It's 9 in the Matthews and Marner era going back to 2019. But this just felt different. And, you look at game 7 and the way that it played out. What feeling do you end up leaving with about the Leafs?
I actually feel good about the Leafs, man. Like, I don't think they were strong enough defensively all year, and I think that's going to be the first area of concern this summer. I know everybody's probably looking at goaltending and thinking that it needs to be shored up because Campbell is going to be a free agent. You still have Mrazek tied up at 3.8 for another 2 years, which is pretty wonky. I don't think they'd like to have that contract, but who knows? To me, it all goes through the defense first. And I thought Toronto was better when they got Giordano. I thought Lyubushkin gave them a boost as well. But realistically, they only have Muzz and Riley and Brody long-term. And, Hall as well for next year. But I think they need 2 more defensemen to be able to compete. I love the offensive group. And I thought they played with some jam and some moxie, Frank. That was the difference to me, is that you saw Marner and Matthews look engaged and they were producing. I just think they ran into a really, really good Tampa Bay team. And, it's 9-game series. Who knows who wins the thing? They haven't gotten over the hump, but I think they were much better this year and set up for it now that they know, again, like, hey, they've proven to themselves that they can at least run with them. But they got to get that win, Frank? And it's going to be a big job this summer.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm with you. I think they'd be silly to just blow this up. I saw a lot of people talking about it. Eddie Olczyk, to close out the broadcast on TNT, said point blank, not even if, he said changes are coming. And I was like, first off, how do you know that? What do you know that I don't, and why? Because it'd be a different story if they gagged on it the way that they did against the Montreal Canadiens. It'd be a different story if they were the clearly better team and found a way to lose again. And yes, there were blown opportunities. To me, they lost this series by not closing out game 4 and going up 3-1 in the series. That was their opportunity to win. You could talk about blowing that third period lead in game 6, a fluky couple penalties, 5-on-3. It's in the back of your net. Also, full marks to the Lightning. Like, they really did have the heart of a champion. And this is a team that is unflappable in so many ways, which is why I like them against the Florida Panthers. And I know it's been a long time since, a playoff series win in Toronto, going back to 2004. But to me, I think you find a way to reshape things. I even think you have to consider bringing Jack Campbell back, because he's going to cost you less now than he would have based on the swoon that he had in the regular season. And the free agent market, or the goalie market in general, is not all that enticing or interesting. You've got Ville Husso as the premier unrestricted free agent. He stumbled in the playoffs. He ceded the net to Jordan Binnington, and the Leafs have cap constraints and concerns. They've got to figure out what, if anything, they can do with Mrazek. They've got some other guys that they need to take a look at in terms of filling out their forward group. I don't know. I like this Leaf team. I like the way that they battled, and I'm with you in saying that I think they just ran into a better team, and they took them as far as you can possibly go the last dying seconds of game 7.
Yeah, man. Like, you go that deep, it happens. Like, and I know everybody looks at first round, but what if this is the third round against the Tampa Bay Lightning? What if the Tampa Bay Lightning win another cup again? Like, I had that experience myself. I've played against teams that go on to win, and you just go like, man, we lost them in the second round. But then you have to realize, like, that's a damn good team we played against. So I'm with you, Frank. I feel way better about the Leafs after this playoff performance than I have in the past.
And for good reason, because they looked like a totally different team. Let's dive into the round 2 goalie matchups, Mike, with this week's edition of the Blue Paint. It's been a while since we had some nerdy goaltending talk. That's right. It's time for the Blue Paint with our goaltending guru, Mike McKenna. This segment delivered by DoorDash. Mike, when you take a look at the round 2 matchups and you see the St. Louis Blues in your neck of the woods going up against the Colorado Avalanche, Darcy Kemper really able to avoid, here's the matchups just in case you needed a refresher after all those game 7s. Darcy Kemper was able to avoid serious injury with that cat eye mask, the fluke stick coming through. I still get chills watching that. But Kemper was really quite good in that series. He obviously had a lot of firepower in front of him against Nashville, but he's going up in an interesting matchup against Jordan Binnington. As we mentioned, Binnington sees the net, bold play for Craig Berube, their coach, to go to Binnington in that series, but it really paid off for them. Does Binnington have the confidence back that you needed to see from him in order to rely on him in a playoff series?
Boy, Bennington sure looked like it. Now, it was a small sample size. It was only the 3 games that he played against the Minnesota Wild, but he did close them out in that series and had great numbers in doing so. I mean, 943 save percentage against a pretty dynamic offensive team in Minnesota. I think Bennington, especially in the last portion of the season, solidified himself back to what he believes in his head can be a winning goaltender because he looks so crisp in his movements and confident in what he was doing. But then again, like, you're also going against Colorado Avalanche. So, you drop a couple games. I think Craig Berube wouldn't be shy to go right back to Ville Husso, who was okay, but not great against Minnesota. Binnington gave St. Louis a big lift. And when I look at Colorado, Kemper was really strong. Obviously, his team's really good in front of him, but Kemper's been underrated this year, Frank. And I think that first month or two, it took him to get adjusted. Kind of gave the wrong impression of him as a goalie. He was just getting adjusted in the second half of the year. He was awesome, but really scary when the stick went through his mask, and thankfully didn't suffer anything major in terms of structural damage. And saw yesterday, he's still got a little bit of puffiness on his eye, but it seems like he's going to be ready to go for game 1. So definitely excited to see this matchup between Kemper and Binnington to start.
Yeah, and no doubt. I mean, just nice to see that Kemper is back to form. You think of the Colorado Avalanche and the issues that they ran into in playoffs past. It's the one thing I was saying, even going back to the deadline, as they made some pretty nice additions, adding guys like an Arturi Lehkonen, for instance. You need health. If you're not healthy, you can't win. And so for Kemper to avoid serious injury, I think is hugely important for everyone. But what about the Battle of Alberta? You mentioned earlier in the show, we talked about Jake Oettinger and how he was ridiculous, but Jacob Markstrom was damn good himself, did not give much up to the Dallas Stars. He goes head to head against Mike Smith, who has sort of been playoff Mike Smith of old. Smith's playoff numbers have always been really good. And he's a guy that, had that one gaffe in game 1, but other than that, settled in, and he really looked dialed in game 7. That was about as confident as I've seen Mike Smith look in a long time.
If there's any team in this tournament, and it's not a tournament, right? We're Stanley Cup playoffs, but if there's any of the teams that are left that are worried about health of goaltending, it has to be Edmonton. You're just hoping that Mike Smith can stay healthy, and he has been for the last several months. So that's a positive indicator. His game, to me, Frank, is really built for playoffs because Smith is not someone who chases. He prefers to stay a little bit deeper. And in playoffs, generally, things tighten up. When teams get frustrated and can't score, they start chucking pucks from all over the ice, from the points, from the sides of the net. And if you're deeper in your crease, it gives you a better chance on those initial shots compared to what in the regular season you may face more rush opportunities than the playoffs. So it's no surprise to me that Smith's played well. His puck handling is a huge asset. It gets Edmonton going up the ice in a big
I almost
hurry.
thought we were going to get a goalie goal with the net empty the other night.
Almost, but you know what? What came closest, actually, we'll talk about in a second. Vasilevsky had an open net for Tampa Bay, and he chickened out on it, and he almost cost him. But
so Smith, and not to interrupt you again, but Smith, I think he was thinking about it with the net empty in game 7, but he had just had that error throwing it up the middle previously that I think he was like, look, now's not the time for me to try.
It could have been. Yeah, you got to take that into account sometimes. I think closing out 7 was a little bit more important, but I think Smith's game's built for it. And Markstrom, to me, is the same way. Like, he was the hardest part of the series against Dallas for Markstrom, I think, was that he's watching Oettinger stand on his head at the other end and face all these shots. And when you don't face as many and your team can't score, like, that could be really frustrating for a goaltender, and you can end up trying too hard. Markstrom didn't do that. He kept his head. He let the game come to him. He just took care of his own business. That's the sign of a mature goaltender, Frank. And I don't think that was there 4 or 5 years ago for Markstrom. It's definitely there now.
if there's one cause for concern for the Florida Panthers, I think in round 2, it would be that Andrei Vasilevsky, starting from game 6 in overtime on, looked insanely dialed in. What
Mm-hmm.
about the other end of the crease for the Florida Panthers and Sergei Bobrovsky? Really just average numbers. You look at Andrei Vasilevsky, he had an 893 save percentage heading into game 7. He was really good in game 7. Doesn't make up for the fact that he had given up 3 goals in each of the first 6 games at least. Who has the edge here? Is it still Vasilevsky?
It's still Vasilevsky. Yeah. I mean, at the beginning of the Florida series, I was kind of going, well, what about Bob? Where is he right now? And he's been fine. All series he was fine. All season he was fine. But I thought what Bob improved upon this year was closing games out. And that's a real skill. Like, you have to be able to do that no matter how good the team is in front of you, even if your team's scoring 5 or 6 goals. But I mean, to me, Vasilevsky's the best money goalie in the NHL, in the world. Okay. And what's scary about him is, like you said, he can just flip the switch, because I didn't think he was very good in the series against Toronto. I thought that he was, a little bit, lazy in his angles, and he playing so low and wide and giving up space. And then all of a sudden 6 and 7, he just took over again. And you see it happen. He just bounces back. So I think the edge is still to Tampa Bay. With Bob, I worry about how dynamic Tampa is and how quickly they can move the puck, and how Bob has a tendency to kind of get spread and chase a little bit on the lateral side of things. So I do think it's add Tampa, but I really want to see how Bob performs, man. Like, I'm really curious of that, because if he can bring it to a level we haven't seen this year, there's no reason why Florida can't get past Tampa if Bob's there.
I'm just not seeing it. I'm not feeling the love.
I still pick Tampa too, man.
He gives me all the nervous feels when he's in net. It feels like sometimes he's all over the place. And some of the stats with Vasilevsky, you just can't argue with. 5 shutouts in elimination games, 18-0 following
crazy.
A loss in the last 3 Stanley Cup playoff games. Series, I don't see Vasilevsky bobbling at any point, even though he was very pedestrian and average for most of round 1. That leaves us Igor Shesterkin, the Hart Trophy finalist, Vezina Trophy finalist. I mentioned that stat earlier in the show. Games 2 through 7 to close out the series, 893 save percentage. His numbers are padded a bit by the fact that he made an insane number of saves in that triple overtime game in game 1. He goes up against Antti Raanta, who held his own against the Boston Bruins. And, one thing I thought was interesting, or is going to be interesting to watch for the Hurricanes, is how far away is Freddie Andersen, and at what point, how much action would you need to see of Freddie Andersen in practice in order to go with him over Antti Raanta? Is it just his crease for the time being? Doesn't seem like Andersen's that close, so it might be.
I've had that same thought, Frank. That's the wild card in the series, because to me, Andersen is a better top-end goaltender than Antti Raanta, but Ranta's historically performed at a high level. He's just never been healthy. And even in the first round, Raanta wasn't healthy the whole time. I mean, they had to go to Kochetkov, the young Russian goaltender, for a couple games. That's the big intrigue around Carolina. I think their top 3 goalies are pretty interchangeable realistically, but it does have a hierarchy to it. If Andersen gets practice time, that's great, but I think it's Ranta's net for now. Unless he bobbles, and you're going back to Freddie in that case, I think Ranta's got it. And for Shesterkin, that first round was a real learning curve. You're learning to manage a full 7-game series, how to handle the pressure of it, how to bounce back. And Shesterkin did. He bounced back. He was able to do that. And going against top-end talent. And I thought the Rangers left him out to dry like they did early in the season. The difference is that the pucks went in the net this time, Frank, where early in the year, Shesterkin was making those saves. So he's set the bar so high for himself that it's hard to live up to in playoffs. But I think that Game 7 especially should give him a little bit of juice heading into this series against Carolina.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch these 4 goalie battles in round 2. And if we learned anything in round 1, Mike, it's maybe to also expect the unexpected with the number of goalie changes and different contributors that we saw in round 1. So the guys we just highlighted might not be the guys that end up finishing off these series with injuries. poor play, potentially end everything else. So thanks to Mike McKenna for this edition of the Blue Paint. This was delivered by DoorDash. You see the promo codes there at the bottom of your screen. DFODD if you're in Canada, DFODD US if you're in the United States. That gets you 25% off and free delivery on your first order with DoorDash. Look, a lot of playoff games on tap over the next number of days. Battle of Alberta. You don't want to cook. All your favorites and more delivered right to your door by DoorDash. Mike, we have absolutely meat wagoned this show, but it's time for our daily face-off inbox question of the day. Hashtag AskDFO. Mike, which team eliminated is going to have the busiest summer?
Well, the low-hanging fruit's Pittsburgh, man. I mean, you got Malkin, Russ, Letang. I mean, even Rodriguez to all figure out as UFAs. Minnesota's going to have a lot of work to do with their salary cap and Kevin Fiala, but I do wonder about Dallas, Frank. You know, is Rick Bowness going to come back as head coach? Do they look elsewhere there? Radulov is coming off the books. Klingberg is still ostensibly looking to be a free agent and go elsewhere. That's $10.5 million to work with. But they need scoring. And it's going to be interesting what Jim Nill does this summer because, you know, Dallas, they really can't rest on their laurels here. Like, they're going to need a little bit of influx and some changes to their lineup, I think, to really be competitive. So who do you have your eye on?
Well, you mentioned Pittsburgh, low-hanging fruit. I also think Boston, there's going to be some interest there. What happens with Patrice Bergeron, him exiting the ice? Does he retire? He really seemed to think that, you know, this might be the end. Even the Washington Capitals, we saw news the other day as they're closing out their lockers on Sunday, you know, Nicholas Backstrom basically hinting that his hip issue is not going away and he has some, quote, decisions to make. But the Bruins, in addition to Bergeron, they have Bruce Cassidy, who's entering the final year of his deal. There's obviously been some friction there between Cassidy and some of the Bruins players. And Don Sweeney, I believe, has just finished the last season of his contract. To my knowledge, he does not have an extension heading into next season. Does he get one? Do they have a regime change? And I also wanted to cheat a little bit. The question was eliminated teams. Got to keep an eye on the Vancouver Canucks. We had Canucks president of hockey ops, Jim Rutherford, on the DFO Rundown podcast today, episode 129. Wherever you get your podcasts, he talked about all the moves that he wants to make. The Canucks are going to be extremely active this summer. One would think a lot of big questions to answer there in terms of their contracts and where they go moving forward with their cap. Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk for today's daily face-off daily bet segment. No games on the slate. What are you doing? Looking ahead towards some series prices?
What am I doing tonight? Staring at a wall, Frank, because there's no hockey on. But looking at some series prices today, courtesy of our friends, excuse me, at PointsBet Canada. So let's jump into it here and see what we got going on around the league. There were only there's only two of these series where the two teams in it split their season series. There wasn't a winner. It's Edmonton, Calgary. It's Florida, Tampa Bay. They were both 2-2 against each other this season. So why not take both of these series to go the distance in 7 games? In Calgary, Edmonton, it's paying out plus 200. Florida, Tampa, it's plus 210. So if you bet on both of them and just hit one, you're going to be up a unit. So I actually like doing that. That's my first of the series plays here. Edmonton, Calgary to go the distance. Florida, Tampa Bay to go the distance as well. You can see Tampa plus 131 underdogs. I don't mind that spot, but I'm actually going to wait and take a bit of a risk here. If they were to lose game one, or even if this series was split after the first 2 games, I actually think you might see those odds go up. So I'm going to wait there. Edmonton, I don't mind them at plus 155, but the health of Leon Draisaitl is just scaring me away a little bit. So I'm avoiding Tampa and Edmonton to win the series, but I'm taking both of these matchups to go the distance in 7 games. The one team I am betting on to win the series is the Colorado Avalanche to beat the St. Louis Blues. As we scroll down, minus 449, there's no value on them to win this series straight up, but taking them at minus 170 to finish this series in 6 games or less, not a great payout, but I think the Avs are going to roll here. They went 2-1 against the Blues in the regular season. They swept this St. Louis team last year. I just think Colorado is simply too good for this series to go longer than 6 games. Carolina, New York, I don't mind the Rangers again at plus 150, but the payout is just maybe not quite good enough for me here. So again, I'm going to be watching this one. If the Hurricanes happen to win game 1, you'll probably see those Rangers odds shoot up to like plus 250 or something like that. And the Rangers have proven they can come back in a series. So the only team I'm picking to win is Colorado in 6 games or sooner. I'm also taking Tampa, Florida, Edmonton, Calgary to each go the distance at 7 games, Frank. And that's all I got for series prices today. But I'm expecting tomorrow there's probably going to be some player odds posted for each of these series. So I might be betting some over-unders in terms of player goals and points.
Yeah, if you can find it, I've seen it out there in some spots. Nathan McKinnon over under 2.5 goals. Over 2.5 was, better than even money. It was, I think I saw it plus 130, plus 140. Keep an eye on that one. That guy is north of a goal a game in the playoffs in his career and had 5 in 4 games. It was a short series. He still ended up doubling what that total was. So keep an eye on that one. And you mentioned the injury with Leon Draisaitl. That's going to be really key to monitor for the entire series. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what the Oilers end up doing. He played through a really painful high ankle sprain in Game 7. How many times can you continue to shoot that thing up? Do you try and get him some rest for the first couple games of the series and then bring him back for the meat of it? There's some thought out there that maybe a high ankle sprain with some rest, only that short period of time may not be that beneficial. Just keep playing on it, see what happens. I don't know. Going to be fascinating. Braden Point as well. John Cooper saying today that he is doubtful for Game 1 and day to day after that in the Battle of Florida. Mike, that brings us to garbage time, and we dug into all of the different facets of round 1, but there were also some viral moments. Which one got you the most excited? Which one did you laugh at the most?
Oh man, it happened Friday night with the Rangers playing against the Penguins, and Mika Zibanejad goes in, has a breakaway, hits the post, comes to the bench, looks for the iPad to figure out what he can do better on it. Well, take a gander at this, because Chris Kreider did not like that Zibanejad was going to take a look at the iPad, rips it out of his hands, chucks it behind the bench, and just tells him, forget it, man, don't second guess yourself. Like, I loved this. This was a leader taking care of business and supporting his teammate. This was not bad. This was really good for the Rangers, and at an appropriate time too. So they end up come back, take the series. What'd you have, Frank?
Yeah, they had a great laugh about it at the podium when asked about it after the game. They did their press conference together. And I thought just his explanation was so perfect in that he was saying, you had the guy beat. What are you worrying about? What you could have done better? You just hit the post. Stop trying to overthink it. And so I think that was hugely beneficial for the Rangers, because their series, they never really overthought any part of it. If they did, they would have lost. They just kept playing. So, full marks to them for their comeback in that series. For me, I'm going to stick in the Penguin series as well. That viral video that went around after one of the goal celebrations of this Penguins fan here trying to kiss what ended up becoming his fiance, as Pete Blackburn reported. He later proposed to her later in the series, which is, I don't know, peak Pittsburgh to me. But she is clearly pushing back against the Penguins, advancing past the first round. Pete had the best meme going in round 1. His meme game was strong, and man, just awful mean as well, as the Penguins end up losing in Game 7.
That was a good one. And then one other one that I saw was last night. They panned a man dressed up as the Macho Man Randy Savage in Calgary after they took the victory in Game 7. And that just, Frank, it warmed my soul, man. That's playoff hockey, macho madness.
Bet it would. That is peak Mike McKenna as well. That'll do it for today's meaty edition of the Daily Faceoff Show. About 9 minutes too long. We had a lot to get to. We had 8 series to cover, and we touched on all of them. We'll be back with a full in-depth round 2 preview on Tuesday, 12 noon Eastern. Tyler Remchuk and Mike McKenna, you know where to find them. I am heading to Calgary for the Battle of Alberta, which begins on Wednesday. I will talk to you there. And until then, enjoy the night off. Get some rest, because you're going to need it. Round 2 on tap on Tuesday. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for watching the Daily Faceoff Show.
Make sure you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel to never miss an episode.